The first game I ever learned was at a birthday party. It featured N children scrambling for N-1 chairs each time the music stopped. You remember this? A chair is taken away, everyone rushes for a seat, and by design, one kid can't get there in time. Out! Take away another chair, do it again. Out again. Out, out, out! Till at the end, you've got one kid, smug, triumphant, sitting down, everybody else having been excluded from play, unhappy, losers. That's how you learn to have a good time in America. It's a prototype of artificial scarcity. I had developed a critique of competition more generally and competitive games like musical chairs specifically, and was invited some years ago to speak at a conference of physical education teachers. And I was going to make my case against competitive sports. And to be honest with you, I thought I would need to bring a bodyguard with me so that I could leave safely after I had delivered this diatribe. And to my astonishment, I got a very warm reception, which taught me something I hadn't realized, namely the difference between educators focused on physical education on the one hand and coaches on the other. In the culture more generally, however, the idea of non-competitive recreation was and remains pretty alien, to the point that a number of people have heard me talk about cooperative games and have been genuinely puzzled, asking, how can you have a game if there are no winners and losers? A question I found deeply depressing, but I guess important to the extent it reflects how much we are socialized to expect that recreation requires that. Today, then, I want to talk about what cooperative games look like and why they make so much sense. Indeed, I think only after you've experienced cooperative games do you really come to understand how much fun competition isn't. This is Kohn Zone. I'm Alfie Kohn. So my very first book, written back when the Earth's crust was still cooling, is called No Contest, The Case Against Competition. And in it, I began by debunking the claim that competition is just part of human nature. There's nothing we can do about it. I pulled from evidence from evolutionary biology, from cross-cultural anthropology, from early childhood education, to demonstrate that we compete because we're raised that way, not because we're born that way. And then I went on to talk about the extent to which beliefs that competition is desirable don't really stand up to close inspection based on logic and evidence, that competition gets in the way of our doing our best work and learning. It actually hampers excellence, much far from being something that's necessary for us to do our best. That everyone loses in the race to win, including the people who win the contests. And I went on to talk about how it doesn't build character. It's actually destructive to self-esteem. It gets in the way of our psychological development. It impedes our relationships, where we end up envying winners and being contemptuous of losers and being suspicious of just about everybody, because even if you're not my rival today, you could become one tomorrow. And so never mind the aggression and the cheating and so on, it really undermines this sense that we can connect with each other in various ways. And all of this, I argued, was not just a function of doing competition excessively or badly, but is built into the idea of competition, which is, by definition, mutually exclusive goal attainment. It means we could set things up so that I do something and you do something, and what we do is independent of each other. Your success has no bearing on mine at all. Or, second possibility, we set things up cooperatively so that your success is necessary for my success, and vice versa. We sink or swim together. And then the third possibility is competition, where I succeed only if you fail. We are at cross purposes. It's not about success at all. It's about winning. And there's a lot of evidence suggesting that competition is not just ineffective, but counterproductive in many ways, at school, at work, in the family, in other environments. So why is it that we assume that if competition takes place during the weekend, and it's called a game, that it becomes suddenly benign, innocuous, necessary for having fun? I discovered, though, that I could give a 2-hour talk on competition and never even mention games. And that's partly because my priority wasn't what happened on the playing field. If I could persuade people that workplaces and classrooms would do better by becoming cooperative, or at least less competitive, or not competitive at all, that would be fine. That would be a huge step forward. And even people who are open to reviewing the evidence about that, about schools and workplaces, nevertheless maintain this kind of curious, perverse attachment to the idea that recreation still has to be competitive. In other words, I'll rethink what we do at the office, but don't touch my tennis game or my kid's soccer game or something, which seems sort of peculiar to me, but you know, what the hell, that wasn't my priority, and I felt, why antagonize people unnecessarily? But the reality is that we could start there and then move on. We should start, if we're talking about kids, we should start with schools. It's incredible the extent to which we continue to set kids against each other in the context of a learning environment, where when kids actually do cooperate on their own, we have a different word for that. We call it cheating. And when we use the word cooperative, we often aren't referring to a conscious attempt to share our resources and ideas. Cooperative means obedient, as I want you all to be cooperative means do exactly what I tell you. Cooperative learning, the real cooperative learning, where kids are in pairs and small groups, turns out to be beneficial on many, many levels, but it's still the exception in our schools. There was an anthropologist named Jules Henry who once commented that a competitive culture endures by tearing people down. And when he turned his anthropologist's eye to the classroom, he wrote about it as follows. I'm going to read now Jules Henry. Boris had trouble reducing 12/16 to the lowest terms and could only get as far as 6/8. The teacher asked him quietly if that was as far as he could reduce it. She suggested he think. Much heaving up and down and waving of hands by the other children, all frantic to correct him. Boris, pretty unhappy, probably mentally paralyzed. She then turns to the class and says, well, who can tell Boris what the number is? A forest of hands appears, and the teacher calls Peggy. Peggy says that 4 may be divided into the numerator and the denominator. Thus, Boris's failure has made it possible for Peggy to succeed. His depression is the price of her exhilaration, his misery the occasion for her rejoicing. To a Zuni, Hopi, or Dakota Indian, Peggy's performance would seem cruel beyond belief. It is the standard condition of the American elementary school. I could spend the rest of my time talking about the damage that competition does to learning, but hell, let's talk about fun and games. let's talk about play. Not play. Play I talked about in a separate episode. Competition, by definition, isn't play. Play is about doing something purely for its own sake. If the goal is to win, it's not play. But we think it's about fun and games. So, when we play games with a group of people, do people cooperate? Well, yes, but only as a means to victory. And that's the central message we teach with team sports. It's us versus them. And working together is just a prerequisite for defeating the other people, such that the playing field has been turned into a battlefield. And if you take this to its logical conclusion, you end up with the Olympics, which George Orwell referred to as war minus the shooting. Kids learn that a game is a recreational event in which half the people have to come out as losers. Meanwhile, we take individual athletic activities, where it could be just about doing well, or better yet, having fun, running, swimming, skiing, weightlifting, gymnastics, whatever, and we gratuitously turn it into an adversarial affair, where we have to keep careful track of how well you're doing it, and it's about you versus everyone else. So the good news about individual physical activity is you never have to compare. You can do it just to have a good time, or if you really want to get better at running, skiing, weightlifting, whatever, you can either compare your performance to an absolute standard. How fast did I run? How many pounds did I lift? And so on. Or you could compare how well you did to how well you did earlier and talk about improvement. It never has to be about beating other people. And you have to ask, what psychological problems or social dysfunction lead us to take these activities and routinely, relentlessly turn them into a need to demonstrate my superiority to other people doing the same thing? Meanwhile, about games, the good news is they don't have to be competitive. You don't have to sort the players into winners and losers. Cooperative games are so delightful precisely because everybody on the field is working together toward the same goal. Now, the important thing to realize here is you don't make a game cooperative just by telling people to have a different attitude about playing competitive sports. You know, when I wrote my book, No Contest, I joked at the time that if people were persuaded by all the research I cited showing that competition gets in the way of psychological health, of relationships, of performance, of interest in what we're doing, etc., if people started to buy that, we would start to see articles appear with names like 10 Steps to a Less Competitive You. This is something I've talked about in other episodes. The individualism of our society means we talk about mindsets, about orientations, about attitudes, rarely looking at the structural stuff. But competition is a structural phenomenon, even though there are individuals whose psychological approach is such that even when there's no competitive game, they still feel the need to prove that they are the fastest or funniest or smartest or most attractive or whatever because of their neurosis. And they never achieve that goal to the point that they can sigh, contentedly lay back and stop having to prove themselves. Because the more you compete, the more you need to compete. It's like drinking salt water when you're thirsty. But for the most part, competition is not just about a psychological phenomenon. It is about the rules of the game, literally or figuratively. Today I'm talking about literally. I said before that competition is, by definition, mutually exclusive goal attainment. The weak version of that is, I succeed only if you fail. I don't necessarily interfere with your performance. We take turns. But, this being a competitive culture, we can't just do things near each other. We have to try to outperform each other. So in bowling, for example, I take a turn, you take a turn, I take a turn. It's considered bad form in bowling to throw your body into the lane to block the other person's ball. You don't do that. But the strong version of competition is not just, I can succeed only if you fail. It's, I can succeed only if I make you fail. That's what we find in war. That's what we find in tennis. A good shot, by definition, is a shot you can't get to and return properly. So to tell people how to have a better attitude about it, don't try to make your opponent lose, just work on yourself, that's nonsense. If you're not trying to make the opponent lose, it's not tennis. It's another game with a ball and a net and 2 rackets, and maybe it ought to be. But the point is, the issue is inherent to competition itself. It's not just that we're doing it wrong or even that we visited upon kids too early. It's competition itself. And so the challenge is, how do we teach kids they can have a good time, they can have a better time without trying to triumph over other kids? It's time to give up the idea that we should take for granted the existence of recreation as something adversarial and just teach kids to be good sports. The idea of sportsmanship depends on competition. If you're not trying to beat other people, you don't have to artificially try to make the best of it, and you don't have to chant in an unpersuasive monotone, 2, 4, 6, 8, who do we appreciate, to say something nice about the other team. In other words, what we do with kids is we accept that they have to be about beating people, but we'll try to sand down the inherent ugliness of a win-lose activity. We'll tamp down the aggression. We'll punish the cheaters, rather than seeing how cheating emerges quite organically from a problematic structure of competition in the first place. And it's not enough to just give out participation trophies to make the losers feel a little better. Now, I should quickly add that the vast majority of critics of participation trophies are people coming at it the other way. They are pro-competition. There's a kind of conservative sensibility here that says only the winners should walk away with a trophy, and that we're spoiling kids, this kind of mentality. And my critique is coming from the opposite position. The only thing worse than a meaningless participation trophy is a trophy that's not meaningless and given only to the winners. That's really unpleasant. That's problematic. I think participation trophies are a way of trying to camouflage the destructiveness of competition by pretending that everybody will feel okay if everybody gets something. And it distracts us from addressing the real problem, which is competition itself. So we give kids these mixed messages. This is, I want you to leave it all on the field. I want you to bring your A game. This really matters. Give it your all. Push it. This game, it matters. We're going to do it. Everything is about pumping them up so they'll win because winning is so damn important. And at the same time that we're telling them they have to defeat the other team, we're saying, but don't cheat and don't get carried away and be gracious and don't be upset if you lose and just try your best. That's a hell of a thing for an adult to try to reconcile those conflicting messages, let alone a child. What we need is a new game, not a different way of playing sports. We need alternatives to football and basketball, and the good news is they exist. A guy named Terry Orlick, who taught at the University of Ottawa for many years, died in 2021. I'll mention him again in a minute. He said, let's look at musical chairs, the very game that I mentioned before. What if we kept the structure intact, removing one chair each round, but we changed the goal to something pro-social instead of anti-social, which is what musical chairs is. It's a deeply anti-social activity. Not as anti-social as dodgeball, where you turn other children into targets, teaching aggression, but calling it a game, so it's supposed to be okay. But it's still pretty antisocial. He said, what if the goal was to fit all the kids on a diminishing space? Fewer and fewer chairs until at the end, you've got all the kids still playing, giggling, using their ingenuity to figure out how they can hold on to each other in such a way that everybody is on one chair. Everybody has fun. Everybody plays the whole time. And it's not because you taught kids to have a better attitude about regular musical chairs. You did something different. You changed the structure so it was cooperative instead of competitive. And I know it's fun because I've played it with both my kids at all the birthday parties they had when they were of that age. Orlick also says take volleyball and change that too. He calls it bump and scoot. Every time you hit the ball over the net, you run under the net and join the other team. The goal is to keep the ball in the air continuously without dropping it. At the end, who won? Who knows? The teams are fluid. The question doesn't even make any sense. More importantly, who cares? Because there's no competition and it's not us against them. People are too busy having fun to be thinking about who won. Now, Orlick wrote 2 books on this topic. One is called the Cooperative Sports and Games book, and the second was the imaginatively titled The Second Cooperative Sports and Games book, filled with outdoor games for kids and adults. And other people at various times before Orlick and after have come up with other games. I have several books of cooperative outdoor games on my bookshelf, and they proceed with different basic premises for how you structure a game. In some cases, each player has to make a specified contribution to reaching the whole goal. In other games, everybody has to reach a certain score, or everybody has to work together against a time limit. The common denominator is everybody playing is working together. They succeed or fail together, and everybody's having fun. And so you end up with people building skills, getting fresh air, exercise, camaraderie. All the benefits attributed to competitive sports actually don't require competitive sports. And in fact, the camaraderie is everybody. It's not the warped version, which is, contingent on defeating a common enemy. You set up a scenario where everybody's rooting for everybody else, and it teaches kids a really important lesson about the possibility of doing things with other people, about the practical benefits of doing that, the deep satisfaction of working with and not against other people. Websites for resources on this you will find in the show notes that also talk about board games, where again, you build skills, you offer camaraderie. Some of these games are for kids, some are for adults. Some are like cooperative versions of existing games like Scrabble or Monopoly or Go. And some of them are completely new and they're fun. I've played them. Some are, I think, cleverer than others. But the point is, when you sit down with your family or your friends to play a different kind of game that doesn't involve physical activity, again, there's no reason ever for it to be a competitive game. Recreation isn't a self-enclosed arena. It has an impact on socialization, which is why it was always hard for me to bite my lips and not talk about cooperative games when I was talking about the harms of competition. It functions as a socialization tool, doesn't it? It prepares kids for adult roles. And if they're raised on competitive games, we're offering them basically an apprenticeship for life in corporate capitalism. We're teaching them that other people should be regarded as potential obstacles to your own success. Sports teach kids to accept the value of adversarial relationships. In fact, the inevitability of that we're teaching them, as opposed to solidarity and collective effort. The sociologist David Reisman said, "The road to the boardroom leads through the locker room." So we can shrug and treat these competitive norms and institutions as just facts of life, assume we have to immerse kids in it. Or we can introduce them to the alternative and send the message that, hey, it's possible. It's possible to challenge rather than just accommodate ourselves to this dysfunctional arrangement of winning and losing. Cooperative games teach that competition is just such an arrangement, that it's ripe for challenge. It also, I think, offers a notable example of how structural reform can happen right here and right now. It's a lot more promising than trying to change the attitudes of millions of people. And it teaches that, it's a subtler message, to talk about structural or systemic change doesn't always involve wholesale social transformation. It doesn't have to wait for that either. We can make systemic change this weekend by playing a cooperative game, just like we can do structural change in a classroom with cooperative learning. The bonus, by the way, for parents is that, when you're playing games with your young children, and typically in this culture they're competitive games because we don't even realize there's another possibility, we have this dilemma. Are we going to end up using our superior knowledge and skills and so on and beating the pants off our poor little children? Or are we going to let them win? Which comes eventually to seem patronizing and awkwardly obvious. And we feel like neither is ideal. No, neither one is ideal. The happy news is when you play a cooperative game, the dilemma disappears. Because it's fine to do your best and share your strategies and teach negotiation while having a lot of fun, because it's not me against you. It's us together trying to figure something out. And that's incredibly cool. But the reality is that when people say, well, you got to play competitive games or you got to do competition and so on, that's just to raise kids so they'll fit in. You got to prepare them for a competitive world. That is a deeply conservative attitude masquerading as realism. Kids get more than enough experience with competition. The last thing they need is more of the same. What they need is exposure to an alternative. I'll mention Orlick once more. He did a study years ago with little kids where he taught them some cooperative games in addition to the usual competitive sports. And he found that the vast majority of the kids preferred cooperative games once they had experienced them. So when kids say they like sports, typically it's an uninformed preference because they've rarely been invited to experience how joyful it is to be able to get exercise and experience that sense of camaraderie and all the rest of it in a game where everybody is playing together, not us against them. So the way you do this is you have to create alternatives in this culture. Read Orlick's books and find other resources for cooperative games, and then set up clubs, organizations in your community. Go on social media and advertise about this. Or if you're old school, put up an index card on the bulletin board of your local library that says, "Wanted, other parents who would like to have games for children that are about having fun rather than defeating people." And then you get together and you find a field, and it's a field of joy, not a field of warfare. And it's pretty cool when it happens. And in all arenas, you begin to learn in classrooms and workplaces and families and playing fields. You learn that the real alternative to being number one is not being number two. It's being able to dispense with these rankings altogether. It's true for adults. It's true for kids. It's true when you're working or learning. And it's true when you're having fun. A quick note before I sign off today. As always, thank you so much for listening. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, however, I just wanted to invite you to check out the episodes where they live, which is on my website, alfiekohn.org/podcasts. You can listen to them there too. And on my website, each episode's page contains a list of resources, books and studies, along with links to check them out. And of course, my website is also where you can read my articles and blog posts if you choose. Oh, and where you can also leave a comment about any of the episodes that you've listened to. Again, just pointing out that Kohn Zone's home is alfiekohn.org/podcasts. Oh, and if you find the podcast interesting, please consider letting your friends and colleagues know about its existence. Thank you. Until next time.